Many conflicts arise from disputes over arbitrary lines drawn on maps, lines that attempt to define ownership of vast swaths of territory. A prime example is the 9-dash line used to claim sovereignty over much of the South China Sea. Can you even picture a line etched onto the open ocean? I don't see it all. Well, this argument may seem childish. It's at the heart of complex geopolitical tensions. Today, we'll be diving into the latest developments surrounding the South China Sea and exploring the implications of this controversial demarcation. Stay tuned, and remember to stay safe.
All right, let's jump into another deep dive.
Sounds good.
Today we're focusing on Indonesia,
Okay.
specifically kind of their tricky situation with the 9-dash line and everything that's happened just since December 1st.
Right.
So we're not going to do like a 9-dash line 101,
Right.
all about that.
Yeah, our listeners are experts.
Yeah, so we're just going to jump into the really interesting stuff that's been happening lately.
Exactly.
So I think one of the most interesting things is President Prabowo.
Yes.
He's been making some interesting moves.
He has been very active.
He visited Beijing, and then he also visited Washington.
Within the same month, which was
Yeah, in the same month.
pretty remarkable.
Like, what's going on there?
It seems like a pretty clear signal that Indonesia wants to maintain its free and active foreign policy.
It's like he's walking a tightrope, right?
Yeah, he's definitely trying to
play both sides.
Yes, trying to get economic benefits.
Without getting caught in the middle.
Exactly, without
Yeah.
picking a side.
Yeah, and if you look closely at each of the visits,
Yes.
they were very different,
Yes, very targeted.
like in Beijing.
Yeah, in Beijing, it was all about the blue economy.
Right, sustainable development of the oceans,
Exactly.
which makes sense.
It does. And they even secured Chinese support for Prabowo's free meal program,
Wow.
which is a big domestic initiative for him.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so very strategic.
And then in Washington, though,
Yeah.
completely different tune.
It was all about diversifying Indonesia's economic partnerships.
Right, so not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly, and trying to attract U.S. investment in high-tech sectors.
Semiconductors,
Semiconductors especially.
which is really interesting given everything that's been going on with the U.S. and China.
Absolutely.
So then this is where the 9-dash line issue comes up.
Yes.
That joint statement that came out after the Beijing visit.
Right after the meeting with Xi Jinping.
Yeah, where they talked about joint development in areas of overlapping claims.
That caused quite a stir.
It did.
A lot of people in Indonesia were very concerned.
Yeah, it was like throwing a grenade into the conversation.
Yeah, it really raised questions about Indonesia's commitment to its sovereignty.
Especially around the Natuna Islands.
Yes, exactly, because that's where the 9-dash line directly clashes with Indonesia's exclusive economic zone.
And, Indonesia has always been very clear
Very clear.
that they reject the 9-dash line.
They see it as a violation of international law.
Right. They say it has no basis.
Absolutely.
So lawmakers and analysts were really worried
Understandably so.
that this joint statement was a sign that Indonesia was kind of backing down.
Yeah, like maybe softening their stance, which is
Yeah.
a big deal because Indonesia has been getting more and more assertive.
Yeah, they've been like beefing up their navy.
Exactly. They've been conducting joint military exercises.
Even confronting Chinese vessels.
Yes, when they enter
Yeah.
Indonesian waters.
So this joint statement, even though the foreign minister,
Tried to clarify.
she went to parliament and was like, no.
We're not endorsing the 9-dash line.
Our sovereignty is non-negotiable.
Yes. Very strong words.
It still kind of created this sense of,
Uncertainty.
yeah, like are
Yeah.
they kind of shifting their position a little bit?
It definitely introduced some ambiguity,
And, in that region,
especially in the South China Sea.
ambiguity is dangerous
It can be very dangerous.
because, China has a history of using ambiguous language to kind of slowly expand their claims.
It's like a gradual encroachment.
Yeah. So Indonesia has to be super careful.
They don't want to set a precedent.
Right. They don't want to give China any kind of legal foothold.
Exactly.
And it's not just about the legal claims.
Right.
It's about the resources.
The Natuna Sea is rich in fishing resources.
Oil and gas.
Potentially a lot of oil and gas reserves.
Yeah. So it's a big deal.
It's a huge economic and strategic issue for Indonesia.
So they're really caught in a bind.
Yes.
They want to work with China,
They need Chinese investment,
but they also need to protect
their territory,
their sovereignty.
their long-term interests.
Yeah. And all of this is happening
Right.
as Indonesia is trying to become a tech hub.
Yes.
Like they have these big plans.
They want to become the tech powerhouse of Southeast Asia.
They want to build a domestic manufacturing base.
For smartphones, for electric vehicles, all sorts of high-tech products.
Yeah, but then you have the U.S.-China tech war.
Right.
Which is making everything so much more difficult.
Exactly.
Because on the one hand,
You have the U.S. export restrictions,
on things like semiconductors.
which are essential for any kind of high-tech manufacturing.
So that could really hurt Indonesia's plans.
Absolutely.
But then on the other hand,
if they become too reliant on China,
for technology and investment,
that creates its own set of risks.
like
cybersecurity vulnerability
and also just being too dependent.
on one country.
Yeah, so it's a catch-22.
It really is.
They need to advance their tech sector.
But they can't afford to get caught in the middle of this U.S.-China power struggle.
It's like they're walking on eggshells.
It's got to find that perfect balance.
That sweet spot.
Yeah.
And this is where Indonesia's mineral wealth comes into play.
That's the wild card.
That's a huge asset. They have so much nickel and cobalt,
Bauxite.
all these critical minerals,
That are essential for high-tech manufacturing.
especially for batteries.
Especially for the batteries that power electric vehicles.
And, both the U.S. and China are trying to...
Secure their supply chains.
Yeah, they both want to make sure they have access to these minerals.
Absolutely.
So Indonesia has some leverage here.
They could play a really key role.
They could become like a major supplier.
To both sides.
Yeah, and really kind of shape the global landscape of clean energy and high-tech manufacturing.
Exactly.
But the question is,
How will they use that leverage?
will they just become a quarry?
Just dig up the minerals and ship them off?
Or will they use this opportunity to actually develop their own industries?
To move up the value chain.
Build their own battery factory?
Their own processing plans?
Yeah. Maybe even their own electric vehicle industry.
Exactly.
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And that's what makes Indonesia so fascinating to watch right now.
Absolutely.
They have this incredible potential.
But they also face some really tough challenges.
And the decisions they make in the next few years,
Are going to have a huge impact.
not just on Indonesia,
But on the entire region.
and maybe even the world.
It's a pivotal moment for them.
So we'll be watching closely
For sure.
to see how it all unfolds.
It's going to be very interesting.
Okay, so we've talked about kind of the big picture,
Mm-hmm.
but let's zoom back in on that joint statement,
Okay.
because that really
Exposed some of the tensions.
yeah, and raised a lot of questions about Indonesia's stance on the 9-line.
Right. And what it means for their relationship with China.
So let's unpack that a little bit more,
Yeah, let's dive into the details.
because I think there's a lot to unpack there.
Definitely.
Okay, so that joint statement, that phrase, joint development in areas of overlapping claims.
Right.
Why was that so controversial in Indonesia?
Well, the 9-line is a really sensitive issue there.
Yeah.
It's seen as a direct threat to their sovereignty.
Especially over the Natuna Islands,
Exactly.
which are right in the middle of that.
Right, where the 9-line overlaps with Indonesia's exclusive economic zone.
And Indonesia has always said
Very clearly.
that they don't recognize the 9-line.
They say it has no basis in international law.
And they've been pretty tough about it.
Yeah, they've been much more assertive in recent years,
They've been sending their navy out there.
conducting joint military exercises with other countries.
They've even, directly confronted Chinese vessels.
When they've come into Indonesian waters.
So this joint statement, even though the foreign minister tried to, clean it up,
She went to Parliament and said, no, we're not endorsing the 9-line.
our sovereignty is non-negotiable.
Strong words.
But it still kind of created this impression.
That maybe Indonesia was backing down a little.
Yeah, maybe they were willing to compromise.
Which would be a huge shift.
And I think that's what really worried people.
It introduced this element of uncertainty.
Yeah, and in that region,
Uncertainty is dangerous.
especially when you're dealing with China.
Right, because China has a history of using ambiguous language.
And then gradually expanding their claim.
Like a salami slicing strategy.
So Indonesian lawmakers are right to be cautious.
They don't want to give China any kind of opening.
Any kind of legal precedent that they could use later.
Exactly.
And it's not just about the legal stuff.
Yeah.
It's about the resources.
The Natuna Sea is a very valuable area.
Lots of fish.
Lots of fishing resources.
Then potentially oil and gas.
Yeah, huge potential for oil and gas exploration.
So Indonesia has a lot at stake.
It's a strategic area for them.
So they need to be really careful
They need to balance their relationship with China
with their own security.
and their long-term economic interests.
It's a tough spot to be in
It's a classic dilemma.
for any country that's trying to deal with these big powers.
Yeah, trying to navigate the U.S.-China rivalry.
So how do you think this is going to play out?
It's hard to say for sure.
Do you think Indonesia will try to, walk back that statement?
I don't know if they'll explicitly walk it back.
Or will they just try to kind of smooth things over,
They'll probably try to reassure their partners,
like the U.S.,
the U.S. and other Southeast Asian countries.
that they're not going to cave to Chinese pressure?
Right, but they also don't want to provoke China.
It's a delicate balancing act.
It really is.
And they have to consider domestic politics, too.
Absolutely.
Any sign that they're giving in to China.
Could be very unpopular.
Yeah, there's a lot of nationalist sentiment in Indonesia.
People are very protective of their sovereignty.
So Prabowo has to tread carefully
He needs to find a way to protect Indonesia's interests
without alienating anyone.
without making the situation worse.
Yeah, it's a tough job.
It's a very challenging situation.
And it makes you wonder how this whole thing is going to affect Indonesia's efforts to attract foreign investment,
That's a good point.
especially in the tech sector.
Right, because investors are already nervous about the U.S.-China tech war.
And then you add this 9-line controversy on top of that.
It just creates more uncertainty.
And uncertainty is bad for business.
It makes investors hesitant.
They don't want to get caught in the crossfire.
Exactly. They want stability.
So Indonesia needs to find a way to reassure them
That they're a safe bet.
that they're not going to be pushed around by China,
That they have a clear vision for their tech sector.
and that they're committed to creating a good environment for investment.
A stable and predictable environment.
Yeah, because right now it's a bit of a mess,
It's a very complex situation,
and it's hard to see how it's all going to shake out.
but it's definitely something to watch closely
Because Indonesia's decisions are going to have big implications.
for the whole region.
So let's shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and talk about Indonesia's mineral wealth.
Right, because that's a key part of this whole equation.
It's like their secret weapon,
Their ace in the hole.
and it could really change the game.
It could give them a lot of leverage.
So let's dive into that.
Let's see how those minerals fit into this geopolitical puzzle.
Okay, so we've talked about the whole 9-line thing and how Indonesia is kind of trying to balance between the U.S. and China.
Right.
But let's talk about the minerals,
Okay.
because that's a big part of this whole story.
It is.
Indonesia has a lot of leverage there.
They really do.
They've got all those critical minerals,
The nickel, the cobalt, the bauxite,
all the stuff that you need for
batteries,
electric vehicles.
all sorts of technology.
And it's not just for electric vehicles, it's for anything that needs a battery.
Right. Smartphones, laptops.
All sorts of things.
So this is something that both the U.S. and China are really interested in
Absolutely.
because they both want to make sure they have a stable supply of these minerals.
They don't want to be dependent on any one country, and especially not on each other.
Exactly.
So Indonesia is in a really interesting position.
It could be a key player in this whole transition to a cleaner energy future.
And a more high-tech future.
Exactly.
They could really shape the global landscape.
If they play their cards right.
But it's not just about digging up the minerals and selling them off.
Right.
Indonesia wants to do more than that.
They have bigger ambitions.
They want to develop their own industries.
They want to move up the value chain.
They want to build battery factories.
Processing plants.
Maybe even start making their own electric vehicle.
That's the goal.
Which is smart,
It is.
because that's where the real money is.
That's where the high-paying jobs are.
That's how you build a strong economy.
Exactly.
But it's not going to be easy.
It's going to be a challenge.
You're going to need a lot of investment.
Both domestic and foreign.
And attracting foreign investment is tricky.
Especially with all this geopolitical uncertainty.
And especially with that foreign entity of concerned clause.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a big hurdle.
That makes companies nervous about investing in Indonesia
Because they don't want to risk getting hit with U.S. sanctions.
if they're seen as being too close to China.
So that's something Indonesia has to deal with.
They have to find a way to reassure investors
That it's safe to do business there.
that they're not going to get caught in the crossfire.
Right.
And then there's the environmental issue,
Yeah, mining can be very destructive.
if it's not done responsibly.
It can have a huge impact on the environment.
So Indonesia has to find a way to balance.
Economic development with environmental protection.
It's a tough balancing act.
It is.
So what are they doing?
Well, they're trying to diversify their partnerships.
Not just relying on the U.S. or China,
Right, they're reaching out to other countries.
like Japan and South Korea,
Countries that have strong technological capabilities.
and that are also looking for reliable sources of these minerals.
Exactly.
So Indonesia is building a network
A network of strategic alliances.
to give themselves more options.
More lever.
And they're also playing hardball,
They've imposed export bans on some raw materials
like nickel ore.
to encourage companies to invest in processing facilities in Indonesia.
So they're not just going to be a raw materials supplier.
They want to be a bigger part of the global value chain.
They want to add value.
They want to create jobs.
And they want to build a stronger economy.
It's a bold strategy.
It is.
But it could pay off.
If they can pull it off.
Indonesia is at a crossroads.
They have a lot of potential.
But they also face some really big challenges.
And the decisions they make in the next few years
Are going to be crucial.
not just for Indonesia,
but for the whole world.
because they could become a major player
In the global tech scene.
in the clean energy revolution.
In shaping the future of our planet.
So it's a story worth watching.
Definitely.
Keep your eye on Indonesia.
They're one to watch.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.